Hi everybody, welcome back to Dusk Arena of Shadows tutorials. This is tutorial number 2 where we're going to be going over how to play the game and what a round sequence looks like and how to win. So we've already made our deck from the first tutorial. I have that here in front of me, and then we have our reference card and our passive and then our health card. Now keep in mind, the most important thing to remember is when all of your wounds are gone on your card, that's how you lose the game. So this is kind of your life tracker, and it's going to be what determines the win condition for an arena match. So what I'd like to do is go over all of the rounds here and action types. We'll just kind of go through what a single round is. A round is going to be two players taking turns alternating between each other until both players have passed. At the end of that round, people will draw back up, and then you'll continue on to another round. So, the very beginning of the game, we're going to do a redraw phase. You redraw up to 5 cards. Now, it is up to 5 cards, not add up to 5 cards. So if you have 1 card in your hand already, you draw 4, or if you had 3, you draw 2. You can have more than 5 cards in your hand, but if you do, you won't redraw any cards when the redraw phase comes around. So, we've now made our hand, we've replenished our hand here, and we're going to move on to the next step, which is initiative. To determine initiative, both players will roll a die. You can do this a couple different ways. You can grab the die in Tabletop Sim and just throw it around and use the physics, but that's not very easy. You got to follow it around. The other thing you can do is you can just right click on it and click on roll. It'll throw it up in the air and give you a random number. So, the person that has the highest number determines whether they want to go first or last in the round, and then the turn alternating sequence begins. On your turn, you get 2 actions, so you may declare up to 2 actions. Now you have to take at least 1 action on every turn, and you cannot take more than 1 attack action on your turn. So let's get into what the actions are that are available to you. We have all those listed on the back of this card. The very first action is to play a card with an action keyword. So we've made our deck before. The basic cards won't have any special keywords, but a lot of your skills or abilities may have the possibility of being in action, and you'll be able to see these on the top of the card underneath the name of the card. So, in this case I've got Bulwark and I've got Tenebrous Form. If I wanted to, I could play both of these cards. That would take my 2 actions and I'd be done. In this case, let's go ahead and just play 1, put that down there. And the reason this one goes into play is it's a persistent, so I'm playing it and it's going to stay in play. So this action allows me to destroy it as a reaction to cancel a critical hit, which we'll get into later on. It's a way that we deal damage to each other. Now, once this is destroyed, that means it will go to my discard pile. I like to keep mine next to my deck over here. And the discard pile, you can look through your own discard pile, but other players can only see the top card of your discard pile at any time, so they're not allowed to search through your discard to figure out what cards have been played. Next up, we'll get into the combat. So the very first thing that you can do is play a move action. A move action allows you to take a singular card here in your hand, and you can play that for the number that is listed. You'll notice all of your cards have numbers that are listed. Normally you play a card for either the number as one of these basic or fundamental move actions, or you can play it for the skill or ability that is listed on the card. So it's an either or option. In this case we're going to play this 2, and I'm going to make a move of 2. 1, 2. Pretty simple. There's only 2 things you have to keep in mind when you're making a move. You can't move through another phantom. Their hex is impassable, and some cards allow you to place tokens on the board. You can't move through those tokens either, so it's important that you keep that in mind. The next thing is that when you make a move, you cannot step on the same hex twice in a single move. So I can't go 1, 2 and return to the hex that I started at. Or if I had a 5, I can't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to actually step on individual hexes differently, or different hexes, in order to make your position on the board. Now, attack actions. We talked about you can only have 1 attack action, but there are 3 types of attack actions you can declare. The first attack action is just a simple attack action. In order to declare an attack action, let's get ourselves over here, you have to be exactly the distance of your attack action from your target. So you can't count long ways, you have to count the shortest distance, and it counts every hex, including the one that your opponent is on, in between the 2 of you. So in this case, there'd be 1 hex and 2 hexes for my range, so I could play a 2. Can't play a 3, can't play a 1, those don't have the range. Range is very important in this game, and it's why movement is so important as well. Now I've declared an attack, this is a 2. Our opponent, if they have some cards, let's grab a couple of them out here. If they have some cards in their hand, they can declare a defensive action against me. So there are two defensive actions. The very first defensive action is just a block. You can play a card that equals this number, or any number of cards that total up to this number. So let's say you had 2 1s. You could also play 2 1s to block that attack. If an attack is blocked, it still counts as a hit, but it deals no damage. Now, if an attack is not blocked, we're going to go ahead and deal damage, and that's why this card is so important. Once you've dealt damage, you take a die, put it over here, and you roll for a hit location. Hit location of 6. So, let's reference our card here. 1 is not on the card because 1 is always a critical miss. So if you roll a 1, you do no damage, it doesn't count as a hit, continue on, you got unlucky. The other 2 through 5 here are actually armor. Now armor is kind of a buffer in this game to start off with, and as you take damage, you'll take damage to armor. So let's pretend this was a 4. That would mean that I would take damage to my 4 body location. So, as I said before, when you've lost all 5 wounds, you lose, but armor doesn't count for wounds. What it does count for is, if I get hit again with a 4, I no longer have armor, so now I will begin taking wounds. So it is your buffer or a way for you to mitigate a little bit of damage with a little bit of luck. The head locations, arms, body, and legs are mostly just aesthetic choices, but some cards will allow you to target specific locations, and so you can build strategies around that. The final number, 6, is considered a critical hit, and so we rolled a critical hit here. What that would actually mean is, even if I have all of my armor here, I ignore all armor and immediately do 1 wound. So criticals bypass all of your mitigation, as well as you have a critical hit penalty, and that is the person that gets critically hit has to take the top 3 cards of your deck, and you banish them from the game. Banished cards are removed from play, they're no longer in your deck, and they go to an area that's a shared area called the Void. These cards can be looked through, and players can see what's inside the Void, and certain cards may allow you to pull cards back from the Void or do special things in that play area. So, that is your first basic attack. The next thing you can do is sometimes you're going to want to do more than 1 damage in a single turn. So let's draw a couple more cards up here and see if we can get some doubles. There we go. So, a power attack allows you to play multiple cards of identical values in an attack, and each of these cards is going to count as a separate attack. So, if I was 3 away at this point, I could play both of my 3s as a power attack. Now, if I had 4 3s or 5 3s, I could put them all down on the board. Every one of those is a separate attack, and each one of those attacks will deal 1 damage. So, it's a way to get a lot of damage on your opponent. The opponent can still declare blocks, so I could play the 2 and the 3 to block one, and a 3 to block another one. But the defender does not get to choose which attacks they block. So if he only had 1 3 in his hand and he played a single block, I can choose which of these cards I want to block and which one I want to resolve. So we always favor the aggressor in that case. The other thing to keep in mind is the secondary defensive action. So let's say I had all of these cards that I had just played, and they were all 3s. That's 4 possible damage incoming to my opponent. If they don't have enough to block that, they can declare what's called a dodge. And to use a dodge, you have to have 2 identical cards in your hand. So we'll use the wild card, and let's go ahead and use this 4. They declare a dodge showing 2 identical value cards, and then move that distance, the single distance, not the total. So 1, 2, 3, 4. As long as their move ends and they are no longer at the range of my attack, so no longer at 3, all the attacks that I have used against them now miss. So it's a very powerful defensive move. The negative for that move, though, is that any cards used in a dodge are also banished. So these will go to the Void, and they will no longer be in your deck for use in further defenses. So it's very powerful to make power attacks, and you can get a lot of damage off, but if your opponent has the right cards in hand, they can get a quick card advantage of you. And keep in mind, you don't redraw until both players have passed, so if I spend all 4 of these cards, I may only have 1 card in my hand, whereas he might or she might have 3 cards still left in their hand, which means they are at a card advantage and will be able to pick me off or do some damage that I can no longer defend against. Alright, the final attack action is called a called shot. So the called shot is the only time that you can add cards together to make an attack. Normally you have to have the card that is the exact range of where you're attacking. But let's draw a couple more cards up here. Okay, and let's go ahead and return ourselves to our starting positions, because I know that that happens to be 8 hexes away from one another to begin the game. I can, as an aggressor, make a called shot, and a called shot allows me to add any number of cards together to determine the range, and it's a single attack. So in this case, I'm going to make a called shot of 8. As long as I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the appropriate range away, I'm now going to do 1 damage that adds +1 to my hit location roll, so it can't critically miss, and it has a better chance of critically hitting. The risk of doing a called shot, though, is any card used in the called shot or the total of the cards can be blocked. So in this case, if you have a 3, which they do, they could play a 3 and block this entire attack. The other one that they could play is if they had a 5, that would block the entire attack, or if they had an 8 or any number of cards that total an 8. So it's very easy to block. You typically want to use this attack when your opponent has used their cards, like I did earlier, and only has 1 or 2 cards left in their hand, and you're trying to get an easy shot off, or you have a long range attack and you just don't have the right cards to get close in some circumstances. Alright, so next up I'm going to skip over one, and we're going to talk about passing. If it comes to your turn and you don't have any cards in your hand, or you don't want to play any cards in your hand, you still must declare an action. And that action that is available to you is passing. Once you pass, you remove yourself from the turn rotation. So if I'm playing against another player and I pass, that means they can take any amount of turns until they also pass, and we end the round. When I passed, I am still allowed to declare blocks and dodges. I can also play free actions or reactions, which are kind of special instant cards in my hand to react to circumstances. But it will never come back to my turn, and I will never get action points again until the round is over. So, if you do find yourself in the situation where maybe you have a few cards in your hand, but you don't have an action that you would like to take, that is where you would use this other action, Hold, the one we skipped over. And Hold allows you to discard a card from your hand. It goes to your boneyard over here. And that counts as a turn action, but you are not removed from the turn rotation. So then it would go over to my opponent's turn. They would take up to 2 actions, at least 1, and then it would come back to me, and we would alternate back and forth. Once both players have declared a pass, the round is over. When the round is over, we go back to the beginning, and we draw back up, and we roll initiative again. So the entire sequence begins over anew. In this case, I would draw 2 cards. So 1, 2. And then they would draw up to 5, and we would roll again, and begin the next round. So we're going to take turns going back and forth, trying to smack each other and do damage until all 5 of these wounds are gone. And when 5 wounds are gone, a phantom is dispersed or dead, and you win the game. That's the basics. Everything else that we want to talk about here, I'm going to do a brief little primer on some of the cards so that you can understand how these play, because there are a couple of exceptions that will be important for you to understand just to get through advanced play. The game itself is very simple. It's all about those numbers. It's about moving and getting the right distance and making sure that you guess or preemptively choose cards to keep cards in your hand to block or to set up your opponent for different strategies. When it gets really crazy in the meta is what we're going to talk about with the weapons and skills and gifts. So let's talk about a couple of different kinds of gifts. Right over here, we've got a couple of weapon cards. All right, and let's grab these. It'll be a little bit faster. So weapon cards have a special attack action here, or a special action called an attack. And as we talked about earlier, you can play a card for its number, so if you're 5 away, you could attack with it, or you could play a 5 to move, or you could play a 5 to block. Or you could play it for the special ability that's on the card. But attack cards actually trigger with their specific action type. So if I attack with a 5 and I have an attack card, I also get the benefit of any text that is on the card. So weapon cards are the ones that primarily have these. There are some gifts and skills, but these are your most aggressive cards, and they're going to trigger special abilities when you're attacking that may allow you to do more damage or make it more likely that you're going to wound. The next thing that we need to talk about are reactions. So let's grab a couple of these here. And inside here, there's one, silhouette reaction. A reaction doesn't cost any turn action points. It can be played at any time, but it does have a conditional effect that you have to meet in order to be able to play that card. So in this case, the silhouette reaction is play silhouette when you're attacked. So if I'm attacked, I could play this card for free, and target non-basic card becomes a basic card until the end of the turn. So that would allow me to turn like a weapon into no text, or a skill if it was used as attack. I could get rid of all the text and keep it from happening. Alright, and I think we probably have, the rest of these are in my hand. We also have actions, which we talked about earlier on. That one's pretty straightforward. The only difference for actions that you should keep an eye out for are actions that are persistence, which I believe we went over. And persistence stay in play, they have an ongoing effect, and then they also have a destruction clause. So some will destroy themselves, and others you will trigger to destroy for the special ability of that card. The very last action that we have is called a free action. Let's grab some of these here. And a free action, oh, I only grabbed one. A free action is just like a reaction, but it does not require you to use any conditionals for it. So in this case, redeployment, it's a free action. I can change the target of a persistent, that card that we just talked about, or move a token to any unoccupied hex. And I can do this on any turn at any time. It doesn't require any action points, and I can use that to cast an instantaneous effect on the battlefield. So that's pretty much it. Those are the card types. These are the basic types of actions in a round. I think it's pretty straightforward. Most people take a round or two to kind of get their heads wrapped around it, and then a game or two you should be up and running and able to dig into what are the cards that you like to see played and what cards fit your style best. So good luck, have fun, and enjoy the tabletop sim, and be sure to back us in September when our Kickstarter goes live. Thanks a lot, guys.